I posted a video yesterday about some really alarming news about the state of America's honeybees, in particular our commercial bees, and the massive die-off that is happening there, and the tremendous financial cost, not only for the agricultural sector, but also the way that that is going to impact the availability of food for us here in the US. Combine that with all of the tariffs and the skyrocketing prices of food. When you lose America's pollinators that we are completely dependent upon to pollinate our fruits and vegetables, we're in big trouble. And I made that video because I'm a backyard beekeeper. I have 2 hives, and not unlike a significant portion of America's commercial beekeepers, both of my colonies did not survive the winter. It's pretty devastating for me. Now, I don't purchase bees. I'm gonna have to go catch swarms this spring. I only populate my hives with bees that would otherwise end up in the walls of somebody's house or in a tree where they would likely be removed by an exterminator. I'm really committed to sustainable beekeeping practices. And since bees are naturalized in the US, I'm going to catch a colony that is in the wild, and I'm going to make sure that that colony does not become a nuisance and instead pollinates my orchard and provides honey for my family. But on that video, I got the question, I'm not a beekeeper, but I keep a garden. What can I do for bees? Yeah, so I think one of the most important things that we can do, well, there's 3 things I think that are critically important, right? Bees are in tremendous crisis because of a number of factors, but one of the main ones is a loss of forage. Forage for bees means flowers. They eat not only the nectar, which they obviously bring back to the colony and they turn into honey, but they also harvest the pollen. That's the main source of protein. They take it back to the colony and they ferment it into a product called bee bread. And I also want to make it really clear here that the things that Americans are doing that hurt honeybees, they also hurt native bees. So when you take up practices that benefit our honeybees, you are going to be helping our native bee populations as well. Native bees are massively understudied. There are a lot of bee species here in the US. There are thousands of bee species in the US, but there are a lot of those species that we don't actually know very much about at all. We don't know much about what they do over the winter, their mating habits, specifications of their habitat and forage needs. We just don't know enough to be able to do a good job of bee conservation for a number of these species. And considering our federal government is just gutting all of our science, like science doesn't matter here anymore, conservation doesn't matter here anymore, because we need to make sure that Elon Musk and all of the billionaires have a bigger tax break. I doubt we are going to be learning a lot more about native bees, but please understand, if you engage in a practice that is going to help honeybee populations, any of the ones I'm going to list, you are also going to be helping native bees. So you want to plant more forage, and what that looks like is you want to have plants blooming from as early as possible. Here in Portland, Oregon, that looks like February. We have rosemary and crocus in bloom, and you want to plant a succession of different plants that bloom all year, all the way until the first frost. And bees generally like to feed from a swath of all of the same kind of plant. In fact, if you look inside the bee colony, if you pull out a frame, the honey from one kind of flower will all be in one section. And you'll notice these patches where the bee bread, the pollen, is all of one color and all of another color. It's because they're kind of organized like that. They generally like to put all of the like blackberry pollen and make bee bread all in one area from blackberries. And then down here, this over here might be all comfrey pollen. So they like to send their sisters out, right? The bees communicate with each other. Hey, there's a patch of blackberries in bloom. Let's all go there right now. And then let's go back and fill this section of the colony with all the goodies from that blackberry patch. So you want to plant clumps of flowers and you want to have that succession. So you're giving them constant food supplies. So you want blooms that are going all year long, but also the shape of the flower matters too. These are going to be some pics for my garden. This is comfrey. You can see this bell-shaped flower. That's one that's pretty easy for bees to access. This is a bumblebee, by the way. I believe it's Bombus fervidus, but don't quote me on that because I'm not a bumblebee expert. Another great example of a bell-shaped flower that bees really like are blueberry blossoms. But the other shape that I really recommend is an upward-facing open flower. I usually call them open-faced. Like this is Calendula pot marigold. And this is Agapostemon. It's a native sweat bee. Here's another example of what I would call an open-faced flower. The pollen and nectar are both easily accessible. This is my very favorite bee. This is Melisodes, the longhorn bee. This is a male. You can see that his legs are covered in pollen. Another example of the flower shape that bees really like. This is an aster monch, and this is another longhorn bee. They're so stinking cute. So look for this shape, a kind of daisy-shaped flower. Simple, open-faced, easy for the bees to access pollen and nectar. So here's an example of a flower that is less awesome for bees. Flowers that have been bred by people to be really extravagant and have these tightly packed, deeply ruffled petals make it far more difficult for the bee to get to the center of the flower and to access the nectar and pollen. Now, Cecile here is one of my favorite roses, so you can definitely still grow those flowers in your garden, but not exclusively flowers that are hard for bees to feed from. This is much better. This is an echinacea. And a big fat western bumblebee on top of it. Cherries, apples, pears, quince. All of those are great bee food, and so are all of the berries. This is a thimbleberry, but anything in the raspberry blackberry family is going to be something that bees really love. Here in Oregon, actually, our native blackberries and invasive Himalayan blackberries are the primary source of nectar and pollen for bees. These tend to bloom in May where we are. But again, I'm trying to plant things that bloom all year long. My apples and cherries are blooming in April. My blackberries are blooming in May. I've got my bee balm and my catmint in the middle of summer. And I've got my echinaceas and my asters blooming all the way into October. Oh, and also all my Michaelmas daisies as well. Those are all traditional garden flowers, but we also want to make sure that we include natives as well. I have a video on my YouTube about how my backyard, well, my entire garden front and backyard is a certified backyard wildlife habitat. That's with the Audubon Society. And my yard is also a National Wildlife Federation pollinator-friendly garden. So I make sure that my garden is as much as you can, as much natives as you can, but I would go for try to get at least 10% of the flowering plants in your garden to be natives. That way you're making sure that you are providing habitat for those species of native bees, which are not necessarily generalists and are really hankering for those native plants. This brings me to the second thing, which is please garden organically. Don't use insecticides. Do not use Sevin. First of all, it's terrible for your health. It's also really, really terrible for our beneficial insects. Avoid the use of insecticides. Avoid the use of herbicides, including avoiding the use of organic ones at the time of day when bees are flying, right? A lot of people use a copper spray, a foliar spray on like maybe your peach trees because you have peach leaf curl. You need to apply those things when those plants are not blooming and when bees are not flying. Here in Oregon, we're dealing with hotter, drier, more extreme summers, and it's really good to make sure that our bees have a source of water. I have a bee waterer in my garden, and you might be thinking that bees love like a bird bath full of crystal clear water. No, they really kind of like grungy, dirty puddles. I found that they prefer like a gross water over clean, clear water. I don't know, they just do. But as long as you have a water source for the bees in your garden. It's not just that bees need the water to drink, they also use the water to create an air conditioning system in their colony. What happens in a beehive that is made out of wax when it gets really, really hot out? It's not a good scene when your baby bees are in there and all of your honey stores for the winter are in there. You cannot allow your colony to overheat. So it's not just the ambient air temperature, it is the heat that is produced by the bodies of 30, 40, 80,000 bees. So they have their own air conditioning system. The bees will bring back water and they will fan their wings and they will produce basically evaporative cooling to cool down the temperature of the hive. So water is important not only for them to drink, but to keep the colony at an appropriate temperature. So forage appropriate types for the entire year, making sure that you don't use chemical agents that are going to be toxic and damaging to bees, not only that might kill them outright, but might disrupt their navigation systems or might cause them to be weakened in some way. Again, whatever we're doing to our honeybees, it is putting even more of a burden on our native bees. It's just that what's happening to those bees is not as well studied. And we really don't have that good of a grasp of how all of these agents that we're using are impacting our insect populations and what a detriment that is not only to the insects, but also to the things that eat bugs like birds. And then we want to make sure that we have a water source for our bees. I think personally, those are the three best things you as an individual can do that are approachable, that are doable. Now, if you want to go petition your city to stop using certain insecticides and herbicides, to stop mowing certain corridors so that there is less forage. If you want to push for policy in your community that produces pollinator habitat, wildflower meadows are a really good one. That's a whole other level of awesome activism that we can be doing when we all have the time and capability, which is we're all real short on it right now. We're all spread really thin. But I think those three things are easy for us to do in our own backyards. And they actually make a really substantive difference. If we all add more habitat, more forage, we all do what we can to care for the bees across every backyard in America, what a positive impact we can create habitat in our own backyards for our honeybees and definitely for our native bees.